Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community. Plus a live Q&A you can't find anywhere else. It's November 22nd, 2023. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be your host. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator for startups that helps teams who are overwhelmed with AWS. We do this by using our over 200 plus Terraform modules that have been battle tested and downloaded over 10 million times. No matter where you find yourself on this journey, we're here to help your startup launch better products faster and free up your bandwidth for innovation so you can nail your value delivery every time. And if you or your team has been banging your head against the wall with underperforming infrastructure, just head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and we'll chart a roadmap for success free. Worst case, you get a clear roadmap for shoring up your infrastructure. Best case, we co-build it with you and your team in 90 days or less. So how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is very informal. Engage as much as you'd like, ask questions. And if you're curious about any of our open source tools or modules, go for it. For those of you on the recording, we host these calls live, so don't miss out. Just head over to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. Now, I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's office hours valuable, share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, youtube.com/cloudposse. Or send us a short testimonial about the value you're getting in our Slack team. Just go to slack.cloudposse.com and you'll find us in the Office Hours channel. Remember, we're not just simply creating content here. We are truly trying to build a community. So with that said, let's get into some news or announcements. All right, first one was shared to me by Matt Calhoun here. Looks like Amazon has already integrated Fig.io and is releasing a Code Whisperer integration on the command line. This is pretty nice. So you can autocomplete as it's doing here, but I saw some other examples where you could just use like natural language translation to bash shell. So this is pretty cool. So this is, what you want to try and do is copy all files to an S3 bucket. It just prompts you with the suggested command to do that. Really easy way to get up and started. We need this for Atmos. All right. Next, has anyone already kicked the tires on this? All right. Next announcement is a small or not small. CloudFront now has its own key value store. My take on this is Amazon feeling the pressure from Cloudflare. Cloudflare's been investing a lot in Cloudflare's workers, and they've had a edge key value store for some time now. So now CloudFront is offering the same. Looks like the maximum size of an object is 10K. Oh, function size is 10K. I don't know what the actual limitations are otherwise. My guess is this is going to be a lot more limited than what you get with Cloudflare. All right. Anyone have something to add to that? All right. So hot off the press, Sentry, which was ahead of the curve, adopting the BSL license, now has decided to change course and actually change from BSL to another restrictive license called the functional source license. And their opinion is this is a better move for your general developer with less restrictions. I don't have any take on it yet. Anyone more up to date on this license? So what's interesting is they had moved originally from a BSD permissive license to BSL, and now this FSL license. Right. Next one. It's not really DevOps, but a lot of us are using OpenAI related products, ChatGPT being one of them. And it's been But can you guys hear me okay? Because I'm tethered, I think. Am I cutting in and out?
Oh, you sound fine.
Sounded a
Okay,
little
cool.
bit funny.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
heard I heard some compression and acceleration, like your voice
Yeah,
sped up. Like
Yeah, for
let's
like
see
a
here.
second. Yeah.
I'm gonna switch to one other network. I'll be right back in a second. Oh, that didn't work. Try. You guys hear me?
Yep.
I'm back. All right, cool. This should be a better connection here. So I forgot to do that before starting. All right, so where was I? OpenAI. So it's been a roller coaster ride from like last Friday when it was announced that he was summarily fired from OpenAI with a vague description that he had been basically not forthright in some of his decisions or something. To then being hired by Microsoft, to then returning to OpenAI as CEO. So I'm really confused where he is, but I'm sure he's going to land on his feet. And I'm sure OpenAI and ChatGPT are going to be fine. Too much money riding on this one. Anyone have the latest take on this? All right.
I did hear there was an inside petition to get him back
Hmm.
that was backed by a lot of top engineers there. I don't know the status of it though.
Yeah.
And he has also been offered a job, I believe somewhere else. So we'll see
Well,
what
at
happens. I
Microsoft. So
think.
Microsoft has
Yeah.
hired him now to lead some internal research group in the OpenAI space. Basically, just a way of, I guess, keeping him close. Uh,
Yeah.
and a legion of engineers, I think, departed when he announced his resignation as well.
So basically, yeah, Microsoft will take over the project, is what it may sound like. We'll see. At least some of their internal projects they're working on, because a lot of engineers have talked about leaving and going to Microsoft now. So
yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah, and I was going to mention, I don't know if anyone saw the letter that Elon Musk shared on his Twitter handle that was shared with the board, team members, and all of that. Probably, maybe in coming weeks, there might be investigation on that and maybe those issues as to why Sam, right, was probably kicked out in the first instance could be addressed properly because they stated some legit reasons as to why they took the actions. And I don't know if anyone saw that.
No, I didn't see that, but I mean, everyone is really curious. I saw Elon Musk also tweeting something about, the board needs to be more forthcoming with information on why it took this severe action. Not that that board is there anymore. I think they've all been let go. All right. Next announcement, minor one. I mean, I think it's just interesting. So Fly, one of the smaller cloud providers, had a provider, but they just said that they couldn't maintain the staff to maintain that provider anymore. So they are just archiving that. I think this is a great example of where the Terraform Provider generation thing that HashiCorp is working on, we talked about a couple of weeks ago. This is going to help a lot of companies that are smaller, so long as you produce an open API spec, it can generate a Terraform provider for you. Next announcement was, for those following along what's happening in the OpenTofu world, they are taking a serious stance at maintaining Terraform and learning this massive code base. I think that this was an interesting post that shows their journey as developers, unraveling the Terraform code to understand it better, and having to re-implement from the ground up the test functionality because you can't just copy it from the BSL licensed HashiCorp Terraform. So they have to take kind of an observational approach, seeing how the testing behaves and implement that same thing without actually referencing the original code. And this talks about their journey, some of the bugs they ran into, and so forth. I think they're posting this along other things because some of the consistent feedback on OpenTofu has been, what's going on and improving basically communication to build up confidence and trust in the project. Here's another funny thing, oops, I guess I didn't linked to something I copied and pasted. So I was surprised to learn that Terraform or HashiCorp has their own doc generator. Now, this is only for Terraform plugins. Of course, everyone is very much familiar with Terraform docs in this community, probably. This is interesting because this is one by HashiCorp itself, and it's been around for a few years. So first I'd seen it. I searched our archives in sweetops. No one's ever mentioned it before, so I thought it was worth bringing up. And it seems highly configurable with different templates, paths that you can specify, and so forth. Here's an interesting one that I'm really curious about. So one of the challenges when you're operating multiple stages or multiple environments, dev, staging, and production, is how do you get a realistic data set in the other environments that doesn't leak any PII, PHI, credit card information, and so forth? There's a number of services out there that provide this, but in terms of doing it on your own, I forget what there's a popular Python library for doing this. I just forget what it's called. Now Glue supports this natively and identifies 200 types of sensitive data, and then you can do a transformation on whatever it finds. So you can either encrypt that data or you can obfuscate it in some way. So this might be a great way for one to generate test data for other non-production environments that's non-sensitive. Anyone have something to add to that? All right, just a few minor announcements then. Amazon access logs can now be organized based on date-based partitioning. This makes it a lot more efficient for ingestion. So you only need to scan certain folders for data or access logs to ingest. So you can assume you've already ingested all the dates prior to that, for example. So minor improvement. And then the next one was, if you're using Amazon's own EC2 Image Builder, it didn't previously support lifecycle management of the images. So you would just keep increasing the number of AMIs that you have, which is problematic if you're doing this in a CI context, because then that ends up costing you money. So now you can have lifecycle rules that expunge older versions of your AMIs. And the last one I have, I didn't get a chance to read it too closely. So these were a summary of some of the key takeaways from the 2023 Kubernetes Security Report. Talks about things, some of the trends that it sees. One of them is like, container security maturity is low. Only 9% of clusters use network policies for traffic separation within the cluster. I think that's pretty true of companies not using a service mesh. Not that we recommend service meshes because the additional complexity of that. However, if you're operating EKS, for example, in AWS, there are a lot of things you can do, and it does support network policies out of the box now. And it also supports pod security groups. So there is things you can do to separate or add protection to the traffic. And a bunch more in here I didn't get to. Cool. Well, that's all the announcements I had. Let's check out the chat and see what else people have brought up here. All right, no other announcements. Before you get into Q&A, any announcements? All right, let's do Q&A. So I think this was my question from last week. I'll just delete that there. Yeah, open mic. Unmute yourself if you have a question, jump in, and let's see if we can help you out. Going once, going twice, 3 times, you're out.
We're all thinking about that turkey tomorrow.
I know. Yeah. It wasn't, the day before Thanksgiving in the US, don't have high expectations for a lot of hardcore questions.
I do have one I'll put out there, top of mind. Does anybody have some recommendations or tooling for linting or otherwise testing GitHub Actions?
Action lens?
Say that one more time.
Action lens?
Was that you, Hans?
Yeah.
I happen to be using it at the moment, so thank you. That's a vote of confidence for Action Lens or Action Lent. Yep.
Michael, you and Hans should connect sometime. Hans has gone hard, very deep on all the linting aspect.
It's now running in GitHub validation workflow of GitHub Actions as well. All our validations running from the Atmos container. So really cool.
That is nice. Haven't checked that one out.
And I take from that maybe I should pull it down and use it and not just their online example.
I'm not sure if you're using also the geodesic container tooling, but we put it in there.
So is it
our container is bloated with linters and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's about time you maybe just need a separate linting container. But you also like to run them locally, I guess. So
yeah,
it's part of that.
And the advantage of that is that we can run them locally and then have the same Atmos workflow kicked off from the GitHub Actions.
So they just provide a binary that you can run then. I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should add a package for this. Well, yeah, so for those not familiar, Cloud Posse does distribute a lot of packages, so it's easy to get our tool chain. And all those packages are available here. So Action Lint would be one of those.
And I'm seeing
everything here's our tool chain anymore.
I'm seeing a build harness extension module for this.
Possibly, that build harness is due for a facelift. So we've been trying not to invest too much more in the build harness and keeping it where it is. What we realize with build harness and makefiles in general is just that you can't scale a large makefile ecosystem easily. So that's why we've kind of just kept it as it is for some time now.
You're going to move to Bazel for that?
Not sure if we're going to subject everybody to Bazel, but yeah, something.
Yeah. What is the advantage of using this packages repository instead of just run of a bot and simple installs?
Oh, because when you want to try and have a way of installing the same version that's available on Mac OS, that's on Linux, that's on different OS distributions. Because if you keep in mind, geodesic has also RPM, Debian, and Alpine releases. So trying to standardize on the version of the tool chain, we created our own package distribution because having a bunch of random curls in different Docker files wasn't maintainable. So this way we have a standard package installer that works with the mainstream Linux distributions.
Yeah, I'm only considering AMD and ARM, but that's basically a very simple approach to get those fixed in.
AMD and ARN. Oh, ARM packages. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, these things have progressively built on each other, but it was ultimately easier to manage the packages this way. Of course, anyone is free to install however they want to install their own packages. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to go also most of the time I like to go to the source.
Yeah. These, and to be clear, these are going straight to the source. We pull those binaries directly from the official binaries, but obviously there's, and then these get pushed to Cloudsmith, and that's how we disseminate them. So that way with Cloudsmith, we're able to distribute it with all the different package systems that Cloudsmith supports.
Okay.
And multi-arch, but I'm sure you being Hans, you'll find some limitation.
Yeah, usually I use Renovate bot quite extensively, as you might have noticed, and it's still running every hour, I believe, the default setting from the public one.
Yeah,
I even encountered already with Atmos or geodesic the image not being yet available for certain stuff, and Atmos. So I'm just pulling them directly from the GitHub releases stuff.
I gotcha. Someone else posted a related question if anyone has checked out ACT for local GitHub Actions development. It's come up a bunch of times on office hours. The gist of it is not a viable alternative for local development of GitHub Actions. You'll frequently be able to replicate scenarios locally that do not work in the actual GitHub Actions, and vice versa. Things that work in the actual GitHub Actions don't work locally in ACT. So you'll end up debugging your things twice. And we've had a lot of developers on our team, try it, start off very bullish about it, and then just give up and never talk about it again.
For me, it's one of the reasons not to rely too much on pipeline specific plugins and stuff like that. And I usually prefer a makefile that's being kicked off by the CI/CD pipeline instead of having to depend too much on all these external things. Again, because I like to do things locally and see that they are locally working, and then it's easy to replicate that in whatever pipeline you're using. Earthly, nice one.
And this is kind of, and what Hans is describing is kind of the business case behind Earthly, the fact that you should be able to run all this stuff locally, and then it should be CI/CD agnostic so that you can just drop those commands in your CI/CD system and go. I like it, but I don't like it at the same time. So yeah.
Make also works in GitHub Actions and Circle CI.
It does, but what you're doing with the linting, I think that's really nice. But what I think is even nicer is when you have the native integration with the linting on GitHub. So when you open a pull request and it does linting, it actually highlights underneath the code which line is in violation. And I forget what those are called, those enrichments. But you can't do that if you're using the same command make target locally as in your GitHub Actions. So it's the common problem of the lowest common denominator. When you build for the lowest common denominator, you get something that works everywhere, but you also don't get to maximize the platform specific enhancements.
Yeah, that's true. But most of, in my case, most of the stuff I do anyway from my IDE, IntelliJ in this case. So a lot of the linting, a lot of stuff is already happening locally, and for me it's like even all those linting stuff that is doing the automatic fixing. Basically, I hate those kind of things.
Okay. Yeah. So if you hate those kind of things,
I like to know what is happening locally before I commit, instead of crap is moving all over the place.
Yeah.
But that's perhaps a reason why I don't trust AI that much as well, to generate all my code and infrastructure from code and that kind of stuff.
I agree. Well, especially when the answer it gives you is different every time you ask it, even slightly. Even if materially the outcome is the same, it's frustrating when it's constantly.
Yeah, but I guess even if we talk to Andrew for certain things, he will also give different answers depending on what he's eaten and what he experienced.
Yeah, that's true too. All right. Isaac brings up Dagger. Dagger's also a similar thing to Earthly. Don't hear too much about it, but yeah, this is by the one of the former founders of Docker.
NQ lang based. It was. It used to be. But yeah, I like the pipelines mostly to kick off stuff automatically without having to worry too much about specific plugins that are outdated anyway. Happens in a lot of cases. So I like to be a little bit more in control what is actually happening.
Yeah.
And that also resolves then a lot of the issues regarding hey, stuff cannot be replicated correctly.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Cloud Posse, I have some opinionations regarding these kind of things.
That is necessary. All right, let's see. Any other questions we can get to?
Perhaps
I have a question once everyone's done.
Perhaps it's good to highlight the Spacelift Amy worker issue a little bit.
Yeah, sure. We can surface that. I've been out of the office here, just seen some of the chatter. Are you able to elaborate on that one, Hans?
Yeah, basically started last week, they did a change in the GitHub repo where they are generating the AMIs for the Spacelift worker images, doing an upgrade of the basic OS that's being used. That's now communicated as a version 1. But that image was already pushed. So last weekend it was like, crap, my workers are not running. And it's ended up, yeah, because in this case, some code was using some commands that are not quite up to date anymore. So basically everything broke in those images. They now made a special announcement, but basically those AMIs are pushed directly from main instead of using release tags and stuff like that.
Eric, I have a PR in components if you want to pull up a reference. It has links in it.
Yeah. But it was quite yeah, annoying to have suddenly pulled the rug out on you.
Which one was it?
Right at the top, very top. Yep. So yeah, this quote here is what Hans got in response to asking them about this, where they said, yeah, it's an unannounced breaking change. And then later, the third link, they did announce it is a breaking change. But it's a pretty simple fix. If you look at the file change, it's just changing how we get the Docker login.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a hidden change that I saw as well at another engagement, where suddenly the workers are no longer connecting to Spacelift, but everything seems to be passing successfully, and you get into it and you realize the AMI changed under the hood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should we mention anything related to AMI change in the description, Dan? Or that it's
I mean, I think that's the why personally, but I can, yeah, sure, if you think so.
Also indicate that it's a fix for something upstream.
And I tried to push Spacelift to include some information that we can do a little bit more selectively instead of just pulling the latest AMI.
Yeah.
But that's
this is what has also bit us very badly recently with all the GitHub Action stuff as well.
Yeah.
From Amazon Linux to 2023. Yeah.
Yeah.
They got rid of so many packages in Amazon Linux 2023 that it's breaking a lot of systems.
Yeah. So that was a cruel one, and it was popping up quite suddenly, and yeah, combination of factors, but basically having this kind of breaking change is quite disruptive, especially in your pipeline.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on this topic, or should we go to, I think, was it Oliver that had a question?
So my question is actually in some ways very basic, but for some reason it's only started bugging me in the past few months. And basically, so you do Terraform plan and everything seems to work. You do a peer review. Yeah, okay, the IAM, resource in for the bucket looks good, and then you you apply the plan, and it complains that you used the resource name instead of the IRN crap. Okay, so the PR has been merged, and now you're scrambling to either create a new PR or whatever. So I'm just curious what people do to mitigate that. I don't know. Do you use local stack, or what are some of the tricks that people have developed to get right this?
So that's a great question, and this is a fundamental limitation, I would say, of working with Terraform, and one needs to assume that no matter all the safeguards you put in place, that apply that you're about to do can fail. So obviously we should try and avoid plans or applies failing. I think the more important thing is to have a story around what happens when a plan fails, or an apply fails rather, so you don't lose track of that change and can address that. So we have a strategy that we've been working on. I think, if you're using one of the taco providers, you can stay on top of the failed applies there. But I think that the fundamental problem with a lot of the implementations I've seen is that they're not based on creating issues around those failures that you can assign to people. And I can show you what we do for that. So in our solution, if you're attempting an apply and that apply fails, we'll automatically create an issue that looks like this. Then that issue can be assigned to somebody. And if that issue is remediated, it'll get picked up by the drift detection and auto close that GitHub issue. But this is a scalable way of managing those failures. And a common reason for those failures, and I can show you why this is an unsolvable problem, is if I look at one here that we had recently. Here's an example that checked out. The plan is successful, but when we went to apply this change, go back to the pull request. And that pull request failed because of a lock. And you have no control over who has locked the state. So here's something that merged into main that if you didn't have an issue tracking it, is a change that could be easily forgotten, especially if it happened before lunch and you're on to other things. So does that answer the question, Oliver?
Well, I guess there's one thing that's worth mentioning, because someone said, so Isaac said, successful apply before merge. So, I mean, the funny thing is that doesn't entirely solve the problem. Because what happens if you're a team of people is that you do a successful apply, or rather you try the apply, and if it fails partly through, then people working off the master branch then get, they see a different they see a different infra code, right? So there's some situations where that'll work, but there's still a lot where that won't.
And the successful apply before merge is the Atlantis pattern that they kind of pioneered. Prior to Atlantis, the norm for all deployments was always after a merge into main, and it was sacrilege to do it any other way. They normalized this thing where you do your deploys before merge, and to some degree it worked. But you brought up a good point, Oliver, that now those pulling off of main and making changes, well, you fixed it for one, you fixed one problem, you introduced another. The other problem, which makes it totally unacceptable to me, is that you are manipulating the infrastructure possibly multiple times before you commit. Before you commit, meaning you commit that into main. You are so you could actually be doing multiple transformations to the state before merging into main. And the only way to figure that out is you got to dig through all those commit messages. Oh, sorry, all those comments on the pull request, which is very noisy. And I don't like it. So I don't think that's the appropriate answer at scale.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, in some cases, automation through, like, say, GitHub Actions, as you showed, can solve a lot of the problem. But that's not always a viable solution for every client. Some of them haven't moved their stuff yet to, GitOps for infra. They're only using it, say, for applications. So yeah, it's an interesting problem when you can't take advantage of the automation and say there's a tool called Terraform. They have an interesting approach where they lock, so a PR basically locks the state, which is interesting, because then if another PR in the same infra code base is in progress, they won't be able to apply until the first PR has been merged. So that can at least,
That's what Atlantis does, right? So Atlantis locks the state at a project level as well, and that's a typical approach.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean that'll solve a category of problems, but I guess in this particular case where the plan succeeded and the apply failed, that probably wouldn't fix that one actually.
But does Terraform support apply on merge to main? And in that case, when is the locking happening? So that they lock it in the PR phase and unlock it in the apply phase, which could be, and then no other projects can be planning, supposedly, I guess, or at least merge during that time.
Well, I think the lock is managed by Terraform, so I imagine that they don't prevent a plan, so the plan can still take place, but it'll be marked as obsolete, as having to be renewed. I saw that, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the actual issue of something working at the plan stage and then failing when it's actually executed seems like there's not really any satisfactory solution. Another thing could have been, well, if you had an easy way to always ensure that all the work is kind of on a sequence of branches, right? So someone creates a branch. If another developer wants to make modifications, they have to base off of that branch, right? So that you're always kind of, but that doesn't really work that well either, because sometimes some PRs have to end up being merged before the more recent PR actually, So yeah, I don't know. Kind of an unsolved problem still, I think.
All right. Any other questions we can get answered today?
Yeah, I put one in the chat, but basically, has anyone migrated from GitLab to GitHub, and how painful was it? What lessons did you learn? What would you recommend? Guessing by the silence, it's not a popular move then.
So I can't give you I don't think I can add information to you, to your question, something you don't already know, because I know you're pretty technical. I mean, fundamentally, the change is pretty easy, just changing the git remote, and that's a simple command. I think the bigger issue would be if you're using a lot of GitLab functionality, GitLab pipelines. I think the other thing to consider moving from GitLab to GitHub, which isn't something which wasn't obvious to me, but is obvious to me now, is, GitLab, you have all the folders. And I've always wanted to have those folders on GitHub, but you don't. But the GitHub approach is really to use multiple organizations. So if you are moving from GitLab to GitHub and you're larger organizations and you have, hundreds of repositories, you might want to consider adopting multiple GitHub orgs early rather than trying to do it later on if you're anyways going to do that migration.
That's interesting because I was thinking about that too when I looked at the structure, and it seemed like most people just went with put everything in one organization and make your life easy. But I guess you're suggesting that it might seem easy, but could cause you some challenges down the road.
So, this is my challenge with enterprise. Like we're on HubSpot Enterprise for sales and marketing, and we're a small company. We're not enterprise, but we need the functionality that's in there. And the same thing is true from GitHub perspective. Like I've always, internalized that we're a small company at Cloud Posse. We aren't enterprise. So why should I pay for enterprise? And then I started realizing all these limitations that I enforced on ourselves that weren't there. So, starting from scratch, I wouldn't put 300 Terraform modules in one GitHub org. I'd have those in a separate organization. And then I would have a lot of our Cloud Posse tooling in a separate organization. And I put our GitHub actions in a separate organization. But that's because we have hundreds and hundreds of repositories, and it's unmanageable, I think, in a single org. Plus, you get greater autonomy when you have multiple organizations, and those teams can manage their own, org level permissions related to that. I know some of our customers are in a similar situation where they are a subdivision of a larger company, and then they've been given their own GitHub organization so they can control repository permissions and things like that without affecting the enterprise as a whole. Also, the new repository rules feature is pretty cool, and that's an enterprise-only feature. If you need any of the more compliance-oriented functionality, GitHub Enterprise is the way to go. A lot more restrictions are available to enterprise or GitHub organizations as it relates to GitHub Actions, GitHub Action runners, workflows. You can tie workflows to runners and prevent certain repositories from accessing certain runners and things like that.
Are you referring to the rule sets?
The rule sets is that new functionality, yeah.
Okay.
So I was kind of blending a lot of functionality into one expression. But yeah, the rule sets is that one where you can now set up policies at the org level and disseminate those.
Yeah, I saw that. I noticed that there were some things that I thought I should be able to do and I wasn't able to do, and you haven't been able to do for a while. But I guess with the rule sets, you can now apply them blanket to your organization. I was also curious if most people are running when on GitHub, are they running with is it okay to use just like the GitHub runners? Because our experience with GitLab is like it's a bad idea to rely on GitLab's runners. So it made sense to run our own self-hosted runners. But looking at most organizations, it looked like they all just use the public runners from GitHub. So I was just curious about what the move is there.
My opinion is that if you want to manage any resources inside of a private VPC, then you're going to want to deploy some self-managed GitHub runners. In almost all of our engagements, I'd say like 99% of our engagements, we deploy self-hosted runners. I think it's also one of the magical things about GitHub is that they don't charge you for your own runners other than what you pay to host those runners yourself. And that's one of the big models of a lot of companies. Circle CI charges you if you want to use private runners. CodeFresh charges you if you want to use private runners, and it's a per runner fee, so it gets really expensive. Spacelift does that. All of Terraform Cloud does that based on the agents. So I think it's cool that you can do it and it doesn't cost you anything more. You still have the option of using self-hosted or the cloud. I think it comes down to some things about control, private and security. If you also trust giving GitHub, depending on what type of permissions you want to give using GitHub OIDC to GitHub to do those things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think our main concern was, I forget the exact phrasing, but GitHub themselves seems to be dissuading you from running your own self-hosted runners to security concerns. But
that's probably only for public repositories.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good point, Dan. GitHub does suggest that you do not use self-hosted runners for open source repositories that anyone can do, because those jobs run workloads in your VPC with access to your network, and that exposes, or how you say it, expands the attack surface. So I would only use public runners for your public repos, and the private runners are great for all your private repos, or public runners for private repos, but we predominantly use private runners.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification.
And we do use self-hosted for both private and public, but you should have a separate group of runners that are responsible for public repos so that they're isolated and secure.
I'm guessing there is a way on the interface to say you can't use these runners in public repos. I'm hoping, at least. I would have thought of that.
Yeah, you can. You absolutely can.
Okay.
But I'm not sure off the top of my head if that's an enterprise-only type of feature, for example.
Well, depending on how you deploy the runners, like you can limit their scope by repo or by organization. So a lot of cases when you have a repo or a runner that has access to, say, your EKS cluster, you only give it permission to be executed from the single repo rather than the organization as a whole. So you can have it's scoped to just your, say, infrastructure repository rather than your entire organization.
That's helpful. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Michael, I had no idea you had the hate for GitHub.
Yeah, it doesn't bear discussing now, but yeah, if I could, I would move us back to GitLab in a heartbeat, and I would spend months doing it and be glad for it, but I can't. So
what is the top 1 or 2 reasons?
There are too many, there's too much reliance on GitHub as a let's call it, it's not fair, but let's call it GitHub proprietary technologies and the weight of the network, right? The value of a network being the square of the, what is it, n to the n-1 of the members of the network. So there's so much software, there's so much contribution, there's PRs back and forth with other packages, and there are several reasons why. There's such a critical mass of people using GitHub and technologies that are available there that you put up with the annoyances. But overall, the experience in GitLab was far superior. I'm not prepared for a dissertation on it, and I think it does deserve a carefully articulated and presented argument for why GitLab is a much better experience. And I'm not prepared to really give that, but there is a huge emotional piece to it as well. I'm very frustrated with GitHub on the daily, and in ways that I never was with GitLab.
Wow. Was that self-hosted GitLab or GitLab Cloud?
That was GitLab Cloud, although we have members of our team who continue to run GitLab self-hosted on the side.
Gotcha. Oh, I'm sorry.
But I'm speaking strictly of .com, right? Of SaaS offering.
Anecdotally, and this is not backed by science, we used to, we were getting enough, I'd say about a year and a half ago to 2 years ago, there was enough deals that we were having to pass on because they were tied to GitLab that I was considering that we should add GitLab as a solution. But I would say in the past year, I've heard more companies wanting to move from GitLab to GitHub. So I've kind of, thrown out that consideration.
Companies, I believe, individual developers who built something productive under GitLab, wanting to move to GitHub, I don't feel that is probably the same proportion, but again, I'm very prejudiced. When you start working with GitLab CI, for example, and you structure a pipeline in a meaningful way with stage gates and dependencies and so forth, and and then you try to do the same thing in GitHub, it's a real letdown. And then organizing your code like you described, having 400 or 500 repositories, or just having 50 repositories without some way to organize your repositories into some sub elements. In GitLab, for example, the groups allow you to bubble up issues across projects, which I think for organizations is tremendously beneficial. In ways that you don't appreciate necessarily. You just have it in theory, but you start using it and you go, wow, this is a night and day experience. Using scoped labels and using, the issue system in GitHub is just Stone Age. You feel like you've stepped backwards in time if you came the other direction. Anyway, sorry. Like I said, I'm not prepared for a proper discussion on it, but you can hear the emotion. I think the passion.
No, I mean we're welcoming of all viewpoints at this. I mean, I would say that GitHub issues felt a lot worse like a year and a half or 2 years ago, but with the new GitHub projects, I feel like issues are getting better and better. And the distinction between discussions and issues, I like that. But I admit I don't have a current GitLab experience. So all right, we got another few minutes here. Do we have some other questions? And let's see, a Q&A. So we got yours answered there. Did you want to add anything to that, Isaac?
Oh no, absolutely no. I share some of these sentiments for sure. Even just playing around with actions, and I'm like, oh, this looks underwhelming. But yeah, sometimes you don't have control over where you go.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, or I'd be, yeah, I don't know. I feel like GitHub has been investing so much into GitHub Actions, and there's a lot of things that you can do in GitHub Actions, especially from the security aspect that you cannot do in GitLab. Especially around the controls around the runners and where workloads are run and which workflows can do that. And in the GitLab pipelines, aren't all the workflows in a single file and then you can include them? But then you need a lot of conditionals and logic in the workflow.
Oh no, there's extensive support for templating and inheritance and so forth.
Yeah. Okay.
If I understood the question correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they were very early. Look, for example, they had templating and inheritance way before GitHub introduced shared workflows or reusable workflows and composite actions. But what I recalled was in GitLab, you had a single workflow file. And inside of that workflow, you can include all these other workflows that you wanted, but the entry point was always one workflow file. And now you had to have logic branches on what to do when that workflow is run. Versus GitHub Actions, you can have as many workflow files there as you want with as many triggers as you need. And the organization there makes sense to me more, but.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I think that's still accurate.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the correct description.
One entry point into the workflow. One entry point into the CI pipeline.
All right.
I mean, I suppose technically you could work around that to parallelize through triggering other behaviors, and certainly you can trigger other projects to build. You could do something similar that several of our CI pipelines are not initiated within the CI system that is native. In this case, GitHub Actions.
Mm-hmm.
So you have other, several of our CI pipelines are not GitHub Action based, as you're aware. So you always have that ability to fire off workflows that are not driven by the GitHub or GitLab CI file. You can always do that. You could do that with GitHub as well. But yeah, it's not immediately parallel or detached the way GitHub Actions are. And I don't miss that. I mean, I shrug that off. I wouldn't care about that myself. I assume I want a starting point, and that gives me capabilities that unrelated parallel actions miss out on. Frankly, it's my feeling.
All right. Well, I guess that was a fair and balanced discussion. We have another 5 or 4 minutes or 3 minutes here. Any last question we can get to before we begin to wrap up for the day?
I have one.
All right, go for it.
Yeah, so there's a lot of scanning like TF-lint, TF-sec, TerraScan. So what's the minimum best practice that you can go away with, and what's the maximum? Do you use all of them, or maybe there's a new one that comes out? What's the best practice for everyone here that uses scanning?
I'm not sure if
Want to answer this one?
I'm not sure if it's the best practice, but I like to use multiple approaches always. Especially with these kind of things, everybody has their own particular insights, particular hooks that they fall into. So I like to use multiple ways to scan them. Perhaps you can use 1 or 2 as the main one, but it's good to also use some of the others to get some additional insights, because everybody has different set of rules.
Yeah, I think what you're going to run into, Megalinter. It's a hit or miss with Megalinter. I think someone else on this call can share their recent experience with it, which was ours as well with Megalinting. But I think Hans hit the nail on the head, is that you get certain policies out of the box with different tools, and there's some overlap with them, which will be a little bit annoying with the duplicate things. But when you deal with open source and off-the-shelf open source, that's part of what you have to deal with, is just combining lots of tools to try and get the widest linting surface possible. I think it comes down to your team then as well. If you haven't started with linting early in your project, it's going to be really noisy and really painful to get everything up to date. So probably add them incrementally to your project so as not to discourage the team from fixing things.
Is there a favorite one, particularly for make Terraform files?
I mean, the two that always come up are TF-sec and TF-lint, right? Both of them have GitHub Actions. If you do implement the GitHub Actions for them, look at the version that works together with CodeQL and exports the serif format. That way, it maximizes your utilization of the GitHub UI to segment off all the linting and security errors into their own security tab. The problem with the Megalinter that we encountered was just too many challenges getting the different YAML files linting the right way. For example, adding too many exceptions to ignore linting on different things. So we gave up trying to standardize on that Megalinter ourselves. I forget, Michael, I think you just recently shared some pain on using Megalinter as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of experiences. Megalinter is a nifty project, and there's a lot of good things that can be said about it. But we're running GitHub Actions. We're running GitHub Actions on EKS. So we already have a massively parallel discrete actions that we can kick off. And bundling it's an anti-pattern, I think, to bundle a bunch of jobs together in one task, and then have to spin off like an 8 gig image to run all these tests that are not always applicable. Yeah. But I think there's a lot of good things that you can do. You can certainly tune it. Fabulous project in general. Just I prefer to have the individual tools for most of the CI pipeline rather than the kitchen sink.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks for the ideas.
So, and just since not everyone might be familiar with this, this is the cool little security tab that I dig on this. So if you go to code scanning, in this case closed, if you're using those actions that upload this serif file here, then under the security tab, you get this summary of the problems. And then if you're using GitHub Enterprise, I believe you can aggregate those security findings across that organization.
Yeah, you need to have enterprise and or the security scanning. So it's not on
The
by
advanced security feature, I think, right?
Advanced
Yeah, I
security.
think that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the advanced
I think
security
we're on Teams.
Is that only required for the aggregation aspect, advanced security? I don't, just using code scanning by itself is in enterprise, no?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but then again,
I believe that
you need more
for the
than
custom rules, yeah,
encryption.
Okay.
that's my impression also is that you have to have advanced. You get a base, you get the automatic code QL feature. I think without it, I looked at this just the other day. So if you're enterprise and you only want to use the automatic generated rule, and you don't want to do anything beyond that, then I don't think you need advanced security. But if you're going to use this much, you're going to use the advanced security, which I think they're sold in like blocks of 10 repos. So, I mean, if you only have a few repos, 10 or 20 or 30 repos, it's probably not that bad of a deal. But if you've got a lot of repositories, those advanced security licenses may cut deeply.
Yeah, that was expensive.
But then again, those are just JSON files, so probably can generate some kind of a GitHub issue if you encounter really scan issues. And then you have your poor man's edition.
Yeah, you could centralize everything and have it checked out in one place, or
No, just have the if there are really scanning issues that they generate GitHub issues. Instead of having to browse through those files and see what's there. In the end, they are just JSON files.
I mean, it's just getting like, it goes from like $4 a user from team to $20 a user, so 5x more expensive. Already just to go to enterprise, and then it's another $50 a month per active committer to go to advanced security. That's steep.
well, and on the surface, you'd say, well, GitLab, right, $99, or it used to be $99 a month. Well, all of a sudden the $23, I think it actually is $24 a user is what it really comes out to be. Looks very attractive, but you step back and try to actually purchase it. We have GitHub through EA with Microsoft. And if you step back and look at the real math that happens when that organization kicks in, and they sell you a block of 100 users. If you need 10, or if you need 11, they immediately sell you 100, even though they're supposed to sell them to you in blocks of 10. And they throw other features in there, and you then take that number of users and divide, you take the total cost that they charge you in the EA, divide it by the users you have, and you come to find out you're spending a lot more than the $99 you would be spending at GitHub. At least or GitLab. That's my impression.
I know we're about to end, but I'm glad we ran over because I did not read the fine print on advanced security. So that is so good to see. Something I'll have to turn off because we're not spending that money.
Well, I can, my prejudices aside, I can tell you don't waste the time on the secret scanning. that is worthless. Well, I've got so many cases where I wouldn't spend a dime on their secret scanning. It's just not even worth, it's they should be paying you to try it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are at time. Thanks for that, those insights, everyone. And we'll be back here same time, same place next week, next Wednesday at 11:30 Pacific. If you want to get today's recording, you'll find it at youtube.com/cloudposse. We'll post it there in a few hours. You can share that with your team. It helps us out a great deal if you leave a review at cloudposse.com/APN-review. It's how we level up within the AWS partner ecosystem. You can subscribe to our weekly newsletter where we syndicate the links and interesting information we find through our community at newsletter.cloudposse.com. And our Slack team, if you haven't joined, is at slack.cloudposse.com. Finally, if you are interested in working with Cloud Posse and seeing if we can move the needle for you at your organization, real easy to find out. Start by taking our quiz, give us some information, and you'll book a session with me directly, and we'll go through your situation and see how we can help out. Go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Again, cloudposse.com/quiz to do that. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.